Claire Laurent. 32 executive restaurant consultant, silent investor. She married Adam Sinclair, heir to a powerful investment empire, and lives in a mansion guarded by gilded gates and old money pride. To outsiders, she is the elegant wife with quiet grace. But inside that house, she's merely an outsider, with simple tastes, belittled by her mother-in-law, Morgan dismissed by her sisters-in-law, ignored by Adam's silent cowardice. They think she's just a pretty ornament clinging to their name. What they don't know is that her sharp business mind and secret investments built the very empire they flaunt. And when their cruelty crosses the final line, Claire Laurent will remind them she was never theirs to own. I once thought the greatest humiliation of my life was being told by my mother-in-law that I wasn't welcome at her family dinner left, standing alone at the entrance of a glittering restaurant. But I was wrong. The true humiliation was seeing my husband sit there in silence, letting her degrade me without a word of defense. That night didn't just reveal their disdain, it awakened something fierce within me, self-respect. They never imagined that the woman they tried to humiliate was the one holding the power behind their empire. So I rose, walked away, and took everything with me. Claire had long mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. At every family gathering, she would arrive quietly, offering her polite smiles, carrying her carefully chosen gifts, candles that smelled of peonies and bergamot, small handwritten notes on cream cardstock desserts. She spent the night before baking from scratch. But none of it ever truly mattered. Morgan, her mother-in-law, would accept the gifts with a fleeting glance before setting them aside, too busy, greeting guests she actually deemed important. Dinner parties were the worst. Claire would sit at the end of their long mahogany dining table across from the towering display cabinet, filled with centuries-old china she wasn't allowed to touch. Morgan always placed her there furthest from the conversation, closest to the kitchen, as if silently reminding her where she truly belonged. Her sisters-in-law Charlotte and Emma would spend the evening discussing yacht itineraries in the Maldives, silk capsule wardrobes from Paris, or which exclusive Pilates studio offered the best pre-summer detox packages. Occasionally they would turn to Claire with polite half-smiles to ask bland questions. "So, how's your little job going?" before drifting back into conversations about gala committees and board meetings. And Adam, her husband. He would squeeze her knee under the table whenever Morgan's comments became particularly biting, not in defense, but as a warning. "Don't start. Don't embarrass me. Let it go." Claire would obey. She always did. Because despite their dismissive glances, despite Morgan's refusal to look her in the eye, unless absolutely necessary, despite Charlotte's smirks and Emma's feigned politeness, Claire still hoped that if she tried hard enough, if she stayed silent and agreeable enough, they would eventually see her as part of the family. But she should have known better. Morgan never failed to remind her of exactly where she stood. Subtle cruelties were her specialty. Like the time she gifted Adam a limited edition watch for Christmas, while handing Claire a basic cookbook titled Simple Recipes for the Clueless Wife. Or the time she arranged for a family portrait with a famous oil painter and forgot to inform Claire about the session, resulting in a portrait where her place was forever empty. Adam brushed it off, saying, "It's not a big deal, babe. She probably just forgot." Claire never argued. She told herself it was better to keep the peace. After all, Morgan's approval didn't define her worth, or so she kept trying to believe. But it was hard to forget the way Morgan would introduce her at charity luncheons. "This is Claire. She works in, what is it again, dear? Some small hospitality job, right?" Her voice always carried a note of amusement, her tone dripping with condescension. She would never say, "My daughter-in-law, who runs boutique restaurant investments," or "my daughter-in-law who graduated top of her culinary school class." No. In Morgan's eyes, Claire was merely Adam's wife, and that label came with no respect, only expectations of silent obedience. When the family traveled, Claire always paid for her own flights. "Adam didn't mention you'd be joining us," Morgan would say sweetly when Claire showed up at the gate, her seat tucked back in economy, while the Sinclair family relaxed in first class sipping champagne. Once, after a particularly cold weekend in Aspen, where she spent her days eating room service alone, while the rest of them skied and posed for photos, Claire caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She barely recognized herself a young woman with tired eyes, flawless makeup, unable to hide the quiet desperation that pulsed beneath her ribcage. This isn't living, a small voice whispered within her. This is surviving. Yet still she stayed. She told herself that if she left, she would prove Morgan right, that she was too weak, too unsophisticated, too unworthy for their world. She kept clinging to the slivers of warmth Adam occasionally offered, a tired smile at night, a passing compliment, a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. She wanted to believe love was still there, hidden beneath the weight of his family's expectations and his own cowardice. But deep down in the quiet hours before dawn, when Adam snored beside her and the vast, empty house hummed with silent judgment, Claire knew the truth. In this world of theirs, gleaming and beautiful and suffocating, she was nothing more than a tolerated outsider, an ornament they hadn't chosen but were forced to keep. Her existence was something to be managed, never embraced. What she didn't know then, sitting alone in the cold marble kitchen with her chamomile tea going lukewarm, was that life was about to force her out of this world in the most humiliating way possible. That soon Morgan Sinclair would orchestrate the final spectacle to strip away what little dignity she thought she still possessed. But what none of them foresaw was that in trying to break her, once and for all, they would awaken something far more dangerous within her. They would awaken the part of her that remembered exactly who she was and how powerful she could become once she stopped begging for their acceptance. Claire didn't expect the night to unfold like this. She stood at the restaurant's entrance, the delicate scent of truffle butter and seared wagyu drifting from inside, mingling with the heavy perfume of women gliding past her in designer gowns. The manager flipped through the reservation ledger with polite efficiency before looking up, his expression smooth and apologetic. "I'm sorry, madam," he said. "There's no reservation under your name." Claire blinked, confusion slicing through her composure. "That's impossible. I was invited to dinner with my husband's family. They should already be here." He gave a small rehearsed smile. "I just checked. There is a reservation for 6 under Morgan Sinclair, but I'm afraid—" "Claire?" a voice cut in. Sharp, amused, familiar. She turned. There stood Morgan Sinclair, radiant in an ivory silk gown that clung to her slender frame. Platinum hair swept into an elegant chignon, diamonds dripping from her ears and wrist. Her lips curled into a smirk as her gaze swept over Claire's simple black dress, her expression blooming with theatrical surprise. "Did you really think I'd include you in tonight's dinner?" Behind her, Adam sat at the candlelit table, his posture, stiff eyes darting between his wife and his mother with quiet panic. Charlotte and Emma sipped their wine, barely hiding their smirks as they leaned close, whispering behind manicured hands. Claire swallowed the rising burn in her chest. "I don't understand." Morgan's smile widened, teeth gleaming under the chandelier's golden glow. "Oh, sweetheart. I didn't think you'd actually come. This is a family dinner. A place like this?" She gestured to the gilded walls and crystal sconces. "It's a bit out of your league, don't you think? Maybe a budget restaurant suits you better." Charlotte let out a small snicker. Emma avoided Claire's gaze, her cheeks pink with second-hand embarrassment. Adam sat frozen, gripping his fork, until his knuckles whitened his silence, roaring louder than any insult. Claire felt humiliation crawl up her throat, hot and suffocating. The maitre d' shifted awkwardly, his eyes flicking away, as other diners paused mid-conversation to glance at the scene unfolding by the entrance. For years, Morgan's disdain had been a cold undertow beneath every family interaction. The passive-aggressive gifts, the deliberately forgotten invitations, the sly comments about her simple tastes. But tonight Morgan had gone further. She had orchestrated this, arranging a dinner leaving Claire off the reservation, ensuring she would arrive only to stand humiliated before them all. Morgan tilted her head, studying Claire's frozen expression with glee. "I do hope this won't be too embarrassing for you, dear." And in that moment, something within Claire snapped quietly, cleanly like a thread pulled taut for too long. The humiliation burned, yes. But beneath the burn was a slow, cold awakening. Because she saw it now clearer than ever, these people had never accepted her, and they never would. Her pulse steadied, her breath calmed. She raised her chin and met Morgan's gaze with a calm, deliberate smile. "Would you be so kind as to ask the owner to come out?" she asked the manager, her voice smooth as silk. Morgan let out a short, mocking laugh. "Do you really think the owner of this place will come out here just because you asked?" Claire turned to her, her smile unwavering. "Yes," she said softly, "because he knows me very well." In that instant, as Morgan's smirk faltered and Adam's brow creased with confusion, the balance of power shifted. Claire felt it, that thrum of something powerful rising within her chest. The humiliation they tried to brand into her skin had only carved out the space for her true strength to emerge. And tonight, they were about to learn exactly who Claire really was. For a brief moment, Claire almost faltered. She stood under the glittering chandelier, its crystal droplets refracting the warm, golden light onto her skin like a spotlight she had never asked for. The din of conversation around her softened into a low, ominous hum vibrating against her chest. The weight of countless curious eyes pressed against her like invisible shackles, pinning her in place. Her resolve trembled. A small voice inside her pleaded, almost sobbing, "Just leave. Walk away before you embarrass yourself further. Before Morgan lands the next blow. Before Adam keeps staring at his plate like you're nothing. Like you were never here." She looked at him, at Adam. Their eyes met, fleeting, fragile, and for a moment she almost convinced herself there was a flicker of concern there. But no, in the shifting shadows of his gaze, she saw only discomfort, a desperate wish for this moment to vanish, fear of conflict, fear of her speaking up, fear of her making him look bad, and beneath that fear, indifference. Her throat constricted painfully. For years she had obeyed that silent command in his eyes. She had let his mother belittle her at every dinner party with saccharine insults, disguised as etiquette corrections. Let Charlotte and Emma snicker at her simple dresses, mocking their thrift store chic under polite laughter. Let Morgan erase her from family photos, from birthdays, from any public moment that might imply acceptance. She had told herself it wasn't worth it, that keeping the peace was noble, that swallowing her dignity for the sake of family harmony was love, that if she stayed quiet long enough, if she blended into their curated world seamlessly enough, they would eventually accept her, that Adam would see her. But looking at him now, his eyes, downturned jaw clenched in silent complicity, something inside her cracked. A sharp, splintering fracture that cut so deeply it almost felt like relief. Because this pain was honest, and for the first time in years she knew exactly what she was feeling. "No," the small, trembling voice within her whispered. "Don't do this. Don't make a scene. You know how this ends. You'll lose everything." She almost listened, almost lowered her head, offered a quick apology to the manager, and walked back out into the velvet night, humiliated but silent just as they expected, just as she had always done. But then Morgan spoke again. "Oh, sweetheart," she drawled, her voice dripping with venomous pity. "Don't embarrass yourself further. Let's not cause a scene. I'm sure there's a lovely little bistro down the street that takes walk-ins. You'll feel much more comfortable there." For a split second, everything stopped. Claire felt it then, the burn of humiliation melting into something sharper, colder, infinitely stronger, like molten steel plunged into ice. Something within her hardened into diamond. She inhaled slowly, straightened her shoulders until her spine felt carved from marble. Her pulse steadied each beat, echoing with grim finality. Her breathing slowed, anchoring her to the polished floor beneath her feet. Morgan thought tonight was her triumph, that this public exclusion was the final proof Claire didn't belong. But what Morgan failed to realize was that she had just pushed Claire past the point of no return. With a quiet smile curling her lips, small, unbreakable, edged with something feral, Claire turned back to the manager. Her eyes were steady. Her voice, when it came, was like silk, drawn over a blade. "Please," she said softly, ignoring the screaming terror inside her that still begged her to run. "Ask Daniel Leon to come out. Tell him Claire is here." The room shifted around her. She saw at first in Morgan's eyes a flicker of uncertainty breaking through the lacquered confidence, the almost imperceptible widening of Charlotte's gaze, the sudden rigid stillness in Emma's posture as her smile froze mid-curvature. Even Adam looked up now, confusion knitting his brow as though seeing her for the first time. Claire felt the floor solid beneath her feet, felt her own power pulse through her veins like wildfire. There was no turning back now, and for the first time in a very long time she didn't want to. The manager hesitated, glancing nervously between Claire's calm smile and Morgan's ice-cold glare. For a moment it seemed he might refuse. After all, Morgan Sinclair was a name whispered with reverence in these circles. But before he could respond, a deep, confident voice sliced through the tension. "Claire!" She turned. Standing at the edge of the dining hall was a man in his early 50s, tall and elegant, in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His salt and pepper hair swept back, accentuating sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that glimmered with curiosity, and something warmer, something almost paternal. Daniel Leon, owner of the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the kind of man who could make or break culinary careers with a single recommendation, the kind of man people waited 6 months just to greet at a tasting event. His gaze flicked past Morgan, past Adam, settling on Claire with genuine warmth. "It really is you," he said, a smile touching his lips. "It's been far too long." Claire felt her chest tighten, but not with fear, with relief, with memory, with the quiet strength of knowing someone saw her, truly saw her in a room full of people who never did. "Daniel," she breathed, her composure holding steady as she stepped forward. "It's good to see you again." Morgan's eyes narrowed, scanning between them with growing confusion. Adam shifted in his seat, discomfort rippling through him. Charlotte's smirk faded. Emma's wine glass paused mid-air. Daniel's gaze swept briefly across the family, noting their expressions before returning to Claire. "What brings you here tonight?" Claire tilted her head toward the table where her in-laws sat, their discomfort now turning into unease. "Apparently I wasn't included in the reservation," she said lightly, her voice smooth as silk. "A bit of an oversight." Daniel's dark eyes hardened almost imperceptibly as he caught the subtext in her words. But then he smiled, calm and poised. "That won't do at all." Morgan let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Oh, please, you can't just..." But Daniel ignored her. He turned to the manager. "Ensure Miss Claire has a table set immediately." The manager D straightened. "Of course, sir." Morgan scoffed, crossing her arms, her diamond bracelets clinking harshly. "You're telling me this restaurant can just find a table for her at the last minute? Do you even know who she is?" Daniel's smile never wavered. But when he spoke, his words sliced clean and precise. "Yes, Mrs. Sinclair. I do." He turned to Claire, his expression softening. "Miss Claire was one of my best protégées. She trained under me fresh out of culinary school. Brilliant palate, refined instinct for service. I always knew she'd go far." A stunned silence fell across the table. Charlotte's wine glass trembled slightly. Emma's lips parted. Adam sat frozen as if he'd just realized he was witnessing something far bigger than a simple dinner. Claire felt Morgan's gaze burn into her, searching for weakness, for cracks. But Claire simply smiled, steady and calm, as the humiliation that once threatened to drown her turned into the sweetest weapon she'd ever held. Because Morgan Sinclair had spent years trying to convince her she didn't belong. And tonight, with a single sentence from Daniel Leon, Claire had just proven she belonged more than any of them could ever imagine. The manager moved quickly now, gesturing for a waiter to set an additional place at the table. White linen, polished silver, and fine crystal appeared before Claire in seamless synchrony, each movement elegant and precise, as though the entire restaurant had been rehearsing for this moment all night. It was as if the universe itself was quietly rearranging its pieces to accommodate her presence. Claire felt a strange calm settle over her chest, almost like the eye of a storm. Morgan watched with tightening lips, her manicured fingers curling around the stem of her wine glass, so hard Claire half expected it to shatter between her diamond-studded rings. Her eyes glittered with barely contained fury. Charlotte and Emma exchanged anxious glances, their earlier amusement dissolving into a disquieted, suffocating silence. The two of them shifted in their seats as if the leather beneath them had suddenly turned to hot stone. Adam Adams sat rigid, his shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the flickering candle in front of him, unblinking as though willing its flame to swallow him whole and spare him from the humiliation radiating across the table. Then Daniel approached his presence, calm and grounded amidst the silent chaos. He placed a hand lightly on Claire's shoulder, and she felt a stabilizing warmth bloom where his touch landed. "Please," he said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man unafraid of these glittering people. "Let me know if you'd like anything off menu tonight. The chef would be honored to prepare something special for you." Claire felt the last traces of humiliation melt away, leaving behind only something cold, sharp, and impossibly strong, a blade forged in years of quiet suffering. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving Morgan's face. The older woman's expression was twisted into something halfway between disbelief and rage. "Thank you, Daniel," Claire said softly. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, yet it sliced clean through the tension at the table. "That's very kind." Morgan scoffed, forcing out a brittle laugh that grated against the hushed luxury around them. "Oh, this is absurd. Are you seriously telling me she gets special treatment here just because she... What waited tables for you once upon a time?" Daniel's polite smile never faltered, but his eyes darkened with quiet reprimand. He turned to face Morgan fully, his words deliberate and unhurried. "No, Mrs. Sinclair," he replied smoothly. "She doesn't get special treatment because she worked for me. She gets it because she earned it." Silence fell like a guillotine around the table. The words echoed in Claire's mind, reverberating through every hidden wound Morgan had inflicted over the years. She earned it. It was the first time in so long that someone had spoken about her, with simple, unvarnished respect, not as Adam's wife, not as an accessory to the Sinclair name, not as a pitiful charity case to be tolerated, but as her own person, her own power, her own worth. The waiter returned, bowing low, as he placed an amuse-bouche before her, a delicate oyster cradled in its shell, topped with yuzu foam and shaved fennel, resting on a bed of crushed ice that glistened under the chandelier's fractured light. Claire picked up her fork, with practiced grace, each movement deliberate and precise, as if choreographed. She sliced through the dish and brought it to her lips with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she belonged at this table because she did. The briny sweetness of the oyster bloomed on her tongue, balanced by the bright citrus and anise of fennel. She savored it slowly, letting the silence tighten around them like an invisible noose. When she finally looked up, meeting Morgan's glare, she offered her an almost tender smile. It seems Claire murmured, her voice quiet, but cutting through the hush, like glass through skin. There's plenty of room for me here after all. Morgan inhaled sharply, her nostrils flaring with rage she could not voice. Charlotte looked away, her cheeks flushing crimson with second-hand embarrassment. Emma blinked rapidly, her lips trembling as though she might cry. Adam sat frozen, his fork, hovering mid-air, his eyes wide and unfocused. For years, Claire had begged for scraps of their acceptance, molding herself to fit into a world that never wanted her, dimming her light to make them comfortable, silencing herself to keep their peace. But tonight, as she sat at their table, welcomed with effortless authority by a man far more powerful than any of them, she crossed a threshold she knew she could never uncross. Because tonight, Claire wasn't just reclaiming her dignity, she was stepping into the war they had unknowingly declared, and she intended to win. And as she lifted her glass of water to her lips, feeling its cool clarity wash down the oyster's lingering salt, she realized with crystalline certainty she would never beg for their acceptance again. From this moment on, it was they who would beg for hers. The meal continued under a suffocating silence, broken only by the gentle clinking of cutlery and murmured orders from passing waiters. Claire felt the weight of every glance, every flicker of forced composure at the table. The oyster amuse-bouche was replaced by seared scallops in brown butter, then by a delicate consommé poured tableside by the head waiter himself. Each dish was a reminder of her place here, a place she had earned far beyond their shallow invitations. Morgan watched her with narrowed eyes each bite Claire took, twisting the knife deeper into her pride. Finally, Morgan set down her glass with a loud, deliberate click. "Well," she drawled, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I suppose it's only natural you'd know people in hospitality." Claire raised a brow, sipping her wine slowly. "Hospitality." Morgan waved a dismissive hand, diamonds glittering under the chandelier. "You know service industries, waiting tables, kitchen work. Not exactly the careers we're accustomed to in this family." Charlotte let out a muffled laugh. Emma bit her lip, glancing down at her lap, cheeks pink with discomfort. Adam shifted uncomfortably, but still said nothing, staring at his plate as if the wood grain might swallow him whole. Claire felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down, replacing it with a cold smile. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Morgan tilted her head, feigning sweetness. "I simply meant it must have been quite the adjustment, marrying into a family like ours." The words dripped with condescension, an undercurrent of venom hiding behind her delicate tone. Claire's chest tightened, her pulse thundering in her ears. For a moment, she wondered if Adam would say anything. Defend her, for once, but his silence was louder than any insult. This is who he is, she realized. This is who he will always be. Her stomach twisted, the humiliation, a molten burn under her skin. She remembered their wedding rehearsal dinner when Morgan had conveniently forgotten to invite Claire's family. She remembered Christmas when Morgan had gifted her a cookbook titled Simple Recipes for the Clueless Wife. She remembered last summer when Morgan told a table full of guests how fortunate Claire was that Adam had taken a chance on someone like her. And every single time Adam had let it slide. Claire set her wine glass down slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. The stem of the glass felt fragile between her fingers as if she could crush it with a single squeeze. She inhaled deeply, her gaze lifting to meet Morgan's triumphant smirk. "Tell me, Morgan," she said, her voice quiet, almost conversational. "What's the difference between you and me?" The table stilled. Charlotte and Emma glanced between them, sensing a shift in the air. Morgan blinked, tilting her head. "Excuse me." Claire smiled, slow and sharp. "You heard me?" Morgan scoffed lightly, masking her confusion with disdain. "Darling, I have no idea what you're talking about." "I'll tell you," Claire continued, her voice silky smooth. "I worked for everything I have." Silence slammed into the table like a physical force. Charlotte stiffened. Emma's lips parted in silent shock. Adam closed his eyes briefly as if praying for the moment to end. But Claire didn't stop. "I didn't marry into wealth. I didn't inherit status. I built my career from nothing." She gestured gracefully at the gleaming table, at the opulence surrounding them. "And yet here we are, eating at the same restaurant, served by the same staff, treated with the same respect by the owner." Morgan's jaw tightened, a flicker of panic breaking through her cold veneer. Charlotte and Emma no longer smirked. They sat silent, absorbing every word. Adam clenched his forked knuckles white, but still he said nothing. For the first time since she'd married into this family, Claire saw it. The tiny hidden flicker in Morgan's eyes, not anger, not disdain, fear. Because Morgan Sinclair had spent years believing Claire was beneath her, that Claire was nothing more than a gold-digging outsider clinging to her son's name. But now, sitting across the table, seeing the steel in Claire's gaze, the unwavering calm in her voice, she realized the truth. Claire wasn't someone to be broken. She was someone to be feared. Claire picked up her fork again, slicing delicately into her dish, as if nothing had happened, letting the tension coil around them, like smoke. The burn of humiliation was gone, replaced by a single undeniable truth, pulsing through her veins. They will never break me again. The tension wrapped around the table like an iron vice, silent yet deafening. Morgan recovered quickly, her lips curving into a saccharine smile, as she leaned forward, eyes glittering with malicious delight. "Well," she purred softly, "since you're so independent, Claire, tell me, if you've worked so hard for everything you have, why is it that my son is the one paying for your lifestyle?" A hush fell over the table. Charlotte let out a quiet gasp. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat, eyes darting between her mother and Claire. Even Daniel, who had been speaking to a sommelier nearby, paused, his gaze flicking toward them with quiet curiosity. Claire felt her breath catch. For a fleeting second, doubt pierced her composure. Morgan's words dripped with scorn, each syllable a calculated blade. Morgan's smile widened as she watched the flicker of hesitation cross Claire's face. She leaned back victorious. "That's right, darling," she said, her voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "My son is the reason you can afford that cute little boutique job of yours. You play pretend at having a career, but at the end of the day, it's his money supporting you. Isn't that charming?" Adam flinched, his fork clattering onto his plate. He opened his mouth as if to interject, but no words came out. He simply sat there, shoulders hunched, staring down at his untouched meal. Claire's pulse thudded in her ears. For years, Morgan had twisted the narrative, casting her as a dependent outsider, clinging to Adam's success. But tonight, something inside her refused to cower under that lie ever again. She set down her fork slowly, the polished silver clinking softly against fine porcelain. Then she laughed, not a small, embarrassed chuckle, a low, genuine laugh that vibrated from her chest, slicing through the thick tension like a blade of ice. Morgan's smile faltered. "Is something funny?" she asked, her voice sharpening. Claire tilted her head slightly, her smile cool and unbothered. "I just realized," she said softly, her tone dripping with quiet amusement, "how truly out of touch you are." Morgan's eyes narrowed to slits. "Excuse me." Claire shifted in her seat, crossing her legs elegantly as she gestured toward Adam. "You think he supports me?" She let out another quiet laugh. "That's adorable." Charlotte made a choking sound, covering her mouth. Emma stared at Adam, her lips parted in silent shock. Adam froze, his face draining of color as he looked up at his wife, horror dawning in his eyes. Morgan's smile vanished completely. "What are you talking about?" She snapped, her voice cracking at the edges. Claire inhaled deeply, feeling her composure crystallize into diamond within her chest. "You see Adam as your little boy, don't you? The provider, the powerful man who rescued me from my lowly life." Morgan's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Claire leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But let me tell you something, Morgan. That's not how this marriage works." She paused, savoring the stunned silence. "When Adam wanted to start investing, he didn't have the capital," she said calmly, her gaze locked on her husband. "But I did." The words landed like a gunshot. Morgan's face went slack with disbelief. Charlotte and Emma turned toward Adam, eyes wide and questioning. Adam's mouth opened and closed uselessly, as if his vocal cords had forgotten how to form words. Claire smiled cold and triumphant. Half of his investment projects were funded with my money, my strategies, my support. She sat back, tilting her head ever so slightly, as she let the truth settle into every stunned mind around her. "You think you can humiliate me by painting me as some dependent little housewife," she continued softly. "That's laughable. Because the reality is your son needs me far more than I will ever need him." Silence thundered across the table. The clinking of cutlery from other diners seemed distant, muted against the drumbeat of her pulse. For the first time in her marriage, Claire saw it clearly. The balance of power had never been with them. It had always been with her, and tonight they were finally about to realize it. For a long moment, no one moved. Morgan's face was pale beneath her flawless foundation. Her lips parted as if words had abandoned her entirely. Charlotte and Emma sat, frozen eyes darting between their mother, their brother, and the woman they'd spent years dismissing. Adam swallowed hard, his breathing shallow, his composure slipping like sand through trembling fingers. Claire leaned back in her chair, her expression calm, almost pitying. She reached for her wine glass, swirling the ruby liquid slowly, before taking a delicate sip. Morgan found her voice first, though it trembled with fury. "You're lying!" She spat too loudly, drawing glances from neighboring tables. "Adam never needed your money. He built his business himself. He used my investment to launch his first project." Claire cut in smoothly, her voice low and lethal. "She didn't raise it. She didn't need to." Every syllable dripped with quiet power. "And I have every document to prove it." Adam flinched as if struck. "Claire!" He croaked, his voice cracking under the weight of exposed truth. "We don't need to do this here." She turned her gaze to him, her eyes glacial. "No, Adam. You don't get to silence me anymore." Morgan slammed her napkin onto the table, her facade cracking. "So what?" She snapped, her voice shaking. "You're saying you funded him. That doesn't change anything. You're still just you." Claire tilted her head, studying her mother-in-law with cold precision. "And who am I?" Morgan's mouth opened, but no words came out. "I'll tell you who I am." Claire continued, her voice now vibrating with the righteous fury of years swallowed in silence. I'm the woman who gave your son the life he brags about. I'm the woman whose name is on the ownership contracts of half his firm. I'm the woman who holds power over the empire you're so desperate to keep pure and untouched. She paused, letting her words sink in, watching Morgan's pupils dilate with dread. Watching Adam sink lower in his seat, as if trying to disappear into the leather upholstery. But more than that. Claire said softly, leaning forward, her gaze locked onto Morgan's with ruthless finality. I am the woman who will walk away and take every single thing you value with me. A stunned silence fell over the table, so heavy it pressed against Claire's chest, like a physical force. For the first time, she saw fear in Morgan's eyes, raw, primal fear. The fear of a woman who realized too late that the prey she'd spent years tormenting had become a predator. Adam reached out, his voice hoarse. Claire, please, we can talk about this. She turned to him slowly, her smile sharp enough to slice through bone. Talk? You mean like how you sat there tonight and let your mother humiliate me in front of strangers without saying a word? Like how you let her insult me at our wedding, at Christmas, at every dinner we've ever had while you just stayed silent? Adam's mouth opened, but the only sound that came out was a choked exhale. Claire felt something shift inside her, a final irreversible fracture from the girl who once begged for scraps of kindness at this table. She stood up, the elegant fabric of her dress whispering against her skin as she pushed her chair back with perfect poise. I'm done here, she said softly, her voice slicing through the thick silence with lethal precision. Morgan gripped her wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. You can't just walk away from this family. Claire tilted her head, her smile cold and beautiful. Watch me. She turned to Daniel, who had been observing quietly from a distance, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met, and for a moment the only thing Claire saw was quiet pride, the pride of a mentor who saw his student become everything he knew she could be. Thank you for dinner, Daniel, she said, her voice steady and calm. And thank you for reminding me who I am. Always Claire. He replied, his voice warm with unspoken respect. Without another glance at Morgan or Adam, Claire turned and walked away. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing like gunshots of freedom. She felt the burn of tears pricking her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Because tonight wasn't the night she broke. Tonight was the night she rose. And as the restaurant doors closed softly behind her, Claire knew with absolute certainty she had crossed the threshold of no return. This wasn't just a dinner, this was war, and she fully intended to win. The night air was cool against Claire's flushed skin as she stepped out onto the quiet street. The glittering lights of the restaurant reflected in the polished windows of black sedans lined up along the curb. Chauffeurs waiting patiently for their patrons to finish dining in gilded superiority. But Claire didn't need a chauffeur tonight. She walked slowly down the pavement, each step echoing with newfound certainty. For the first time in years, her mind was sharp, her purpose crystalline. There was no trembling in her hands, no burning in her chest, only clarity, cold and absolute. She pulled out her phone, her fingers steady as they typed out a short message. Me. We're moving forward. Initiate the process. First thing tomorrow. Seconds later, her phone buzzed with a reply. Attorney understood. You'll have the first draft of the divorce settlement by noon. Claire exhaled softly, a long, quiet breath that carried away years of swallowed humiliation. Divorce. The word didn't scare her. What scared her was how long she had convinced herself she needed Adam's protection, his family's acceptance, their empty approval. But not anymore. Tonight had given her something far greater than their acceptance. It had given her back herself. She arrived home before Adam. The house was silent, vast, and cold. She walked through the marble foyer without turning on the lights, her heels clicking across the floor as she moved with deliberate grace. There was no rush, no panic, only precision. She entered Adam's office, flicking on the lamp beside his mahogany desk. The familiar scent of cedarwood and expensive leather rose around her. She crossed to the safe hidden behind a framed art print. The code was his birthday. He had never bothered to change it. Typical, she thought with a flicker of amused disdain. Inside lay the thick stack of documents. She knew by heart investment agreements, silent partnership contracts, and the original seed funding paperwork, bearing her signature, the paperwork proving she was the true financial backbone of his empire. She lifted it out, flipping through the pages, scanning the legal jargon that once intimidated her, but now read like poetry. She snapped a clear photo of each page before replacing the file exactly where it had been. Then she turned, leaving the office and walking to their bedroom. She pulled out a suitcase from under the bed, laying it on the white linen sheets. Carefully, methodically, she began packing, not in haste, not in anger, but with absolute clarity, each folded silk blouse and structured dress a declaration of her intent. When Adam walked in an hour later, the scent of aged bourbon clinging to his suit, he paused in the doorway, eyes widening at the sight of her suitcase by the bed. "Claire," he breathed, his voice breaking the heavy silence. What are you doing?" She didn't look up as she zipped her bag closed. "I'm leaving." He stepped forward, panic bleeding into his features. Wait, can we talk about this?" She stood up, her eyes meeting his with calm finality. "No, Adam, we can't." His jaw tensed, the muscles twitching as anger sparked in his eyes. "If you think you're walking away from this marriage with half of everything, you're mistaken." Claire's lips curved into a small, pitying smile. "Oh, Adam," she said softly, her voice like silk over steel. "You really should read your own contracts more carefully." Confusion flickered across his face, quickly morphing into dread. "What are you talking about?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You wouldn't even have half of what you own if it weren't for me. You used my money to build your investments. And guess what?" She paused, savoring the terror blooming in his eyes. "I have all the paperwork to prove it." His breath hitched, his face draining of color, as reality slammed into him like a freight train. Adam staggered back a step, gripping the edge of the dresser to steady himself. For the first time in their marriage, he looked at her not as a wife to be tolerated or an accessory to be silenced. He looked at her as someone who held his entire world in the palm of her hand, and Claire smiled, feeling the power surge through her chest, cold and righteous and absolute. Because tonight her reward wasn't just freedom. It was the knowledge that she had never needed their acceptance to define her worth, that she could walk away from everything they dangled above her head and still rise higher than they could ever imagine. Claire wheeled her suitcase through the silent foyer, each roll of its wheels echoing off the marble floor like a ticking clock, counting down to freedom. The chandeliers glimmered overhead, casting fractured gold light across the grand hallway. For years she had looked up at them and felt small, an interloper beneath their cold, glittering gaze. Now they only seemed gaudy. Adam stood frozen near the bottom of the staircase, his tie loosened, shirt slightly, wrinkled from the dinner he never imagined would end like this. His lips parted, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "Claire," he rasped, voice trembling. "What are you doing?" She paused, her fingers tightening around the suitcase handle. She turned to look at him, taking in the man she had once thought was her future. His boyish features that once seemed gentle now looked weak. His shoulders always slightly sloped in submission to his mother, looked smaller than ever under the chandelier's light. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice smooth and clear. Adam blinked, shaking his head slightly, as if trying to wake from a nightmare. No, you're not. We can fix this." Claire tilted her head, studying him with a gaze so calm it made him flinch. "Fix what, Adam? Your silence? Your cowardice? Your mother's obsession with humiliating me while you sit there and say nothing?" His jaw tightened, shame flashing across his face. "I was trying to keep the peace." She let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Peace?" She stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made him look away. That wasn't peace. That was surrender. "And I'm done surrendering." He reached out suddenly, grabbing her wrist. "Claire, please." Her eyes hardened. "Let go." He hesitated, his grip loosening under the force of her glare. She pulled her wrist free, adjusting the sleeve of her coat with slow, deliberate grace. Every movement radiated cold finality. "You're my wife, Adam," whispered his voice, cracking under the weight of panic. "You can't just leave." Claire raised her brow slightly. "Watch me." She turned away from him and opened the front door. The night air rushed in cool and fragrant, with blooming jasmine from the garden she had planted herself, the only part of this house that ever truly felt like hers. Adam's voice followed her, thick with desperation. "Where will you go?" She paused in the doorway, her silhouette framed by warm light behind her, and the dark city stretching endlessly ahead. Slowly she turned back to face him, her expression calm and almost pitying. "I'll be staying at the penthouse," she said softly. His brows furrowed. "What penthouse?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Oh, Adam. The one you think you own." Confusion flickered across his face, quickly morphing into horror. No, that's mine. I bought it." She shook her head gently, her eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. "No, darling. My holding company bought it. It was never yours." His face drained of color. He staggered back a step, gripping the console table behind him for balance. You lied to me," he whispered. Claire tilted her head slightly. "No. You just never bothered to read the contracts you signed." Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. She could see it in his eyes, the way realization shattered the fragile illusions he had built about her, about them, about his own power. Finally, he found his voice, though it came out strangled. "If you think you're walking away from this marriage with half of everything, you're delusional." She studied him for a long, quiet moment, then stepped back into the foyer's warm light. Her gaze sliced through him, calm and merciless. "Oh, Adam," she said softly, almost tenderly. "You still don't understand, do you?" His eyes narrowed. "Understand what?" She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that made him shiver. "You wouldn't even have half of what you own if it weren't for me. You used my money to build your empire. And guess what?" She paused, letting her words hang between them like a blade. "I have every document to prove it." He inhaled sharply, his chest heaving with panic. "Claire." But she was already turning away, walking into the dark, jasmine-scented night. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if with every meter she placed between herself and that house, a decade's worth of chained burdens fell away. She didn't know exactly where this road back would lead. All she knew was that it wasn't leading her back to him. It was leading her back to herself. The city stretched before her, a silent kingdom under the moonlight, waiting to be conquered. And as she walked away without looking back, suitcase rolling behind her like a loyal soldier, Claire felt her heart settle into an unbreakable calm. Because this road, wasn't a retreat, and every step she took tonight was a step toward becoming the woman they would one day fear to even speak against. The sun rose over the city in ribbons of pale gold, washing the skyline with light that spilled into Claire's new penthouse suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the awakening metropolis, below streets humming with early traffic, glass towers glinting like blades, the river flowing with quiet certainty toward the horizon. Claire stood by the window, coffee mug cradled in her hands, wearing a silk robe the color of midnight. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, calm, clear-eyed, unbreakable. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop behind her. She didn't need to check it to know what it was. She let it ring out, savoring the quiet power thrumming beneath her skin. When she finally turned, she picked up the phone and scrolled through the dozen missed calls and frantic messages from Adam. "Adam, please, Claire. We can fix this." "Adam, you can't just take everything." "Adam, call me back." She smiled faintly, setting the phone down without replying. Last night, after leaving the house, she had met her attorney at the penthouse's private lounge. Together, they finalized the remaining paperwork. Claire had signed each page with steady hands, feeling years of suffocated dignity rise within her chest with every stroke of ink. Now it was done. Adam had tried to fight back, of course. He stormed into meetings, threatened legal war, demanded she relinquish her majority share in his firm. But the moment her lawyers presented the original contracts, showing her as the founding investor, the silent owner, holding controlling interest, his bravado crumbled like wet paper. Morgan had called her too shrill with rage. "You gold-digging little snake. You've ruined everything." Claire had simply smiled and replied softly, "No, Morgan. I built everything. Your son just didn't read the fine print." Then she blocked her number. Her phone buzzed again with a new notification. This time it was from her attorney. Attorney transfer confirmed. "You are now listed as CEO and majority shareholder of Sinclair Investments. Congratulations." Claire exhaled slowly, a trembling sigh that felt like release. She set down her coffee cup, walked to her desk by the window, and opened her laptop. The homepage of Sinclair Investments loaded her name displayed in the black serif letters beneath the company crest. For years, they had dangled wealth and status over her head like bait, making her feel small, dependent, replaceable. Now she owned them. Every deal Adam had made with her money, every profit he boasted about, every slice of the empire Morgan clung to for social power, all of it was hers. She could sell it, dismantle it, rebuild it in her name alone. The possibilities stretched before her like the city skyline glowing in dawn's pale fire. Her phone buzzed once more. Another message from Adam. "Adam, please. I don't know what to do without you." She stared at the words for a long, quiet moment. The man she had once believed was her world now stood stripped of all illusions, desperate and powerless without her. She typed back only 2 words. "Claire. Not my problem." Then she blocked his number too. Claire turned back to the window, the rising sun catching the edges of her hair like a halo of molten gold. She felt no sorrow, no guilt, only calm, the calm of a woman who had walked through hell and emerged not as a survivor, but as a sovereign. Because today she wasn't just free, she was reborn, and she would never again bow to anyone who believed their name alone made them powerful. She had built herself from nothing once, and now standing in the penthouse, her husband thought he owned, ruling the company he believed he controlled. She smiled a quiet, beautiful smile that carried the weight of her final resurrection. Because the truth was simple, she would never belong to them. But now everything they valued belonged to her. The day unfolded in quiet triumph. Claire spent the morning finalizing transition meetings with the board. Each executive greeted her with careful deference, their tailored suits and controlled expressions unable to mask the sharp calculation flickering in their eyes. And beneath that calculation, veiled respect. She saw them clearly now, these men who once overlooked her at gala dinners, who spoke over her at charity meetings as if her words were ornamental. The women who called her Adam's sweet little wife while sipping champagne bought with silent investments she had orchestrated under layered shell corporations. Now they addressed her with a single title, Madam CEO. By noon, she stood alone in her new corner office. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like an oil painting in motion. Clouds drifting past spires of glass and steel sunlight, flickering off mirrored towers and dancing across the river far below. Cars flowed along bridges like silver blood in concrete veins. Life pulsed beneath her. Her assistant knocked gently and stepped inside, placing a silver tray on her desk, a delicate porcelain cup of steaming green tea, its fragrant warmth curling into the cool air, and a simple ivory note embossed in gold. "Congratulations. The empire is yours." Claire sat down, feeling the polished mahogany under her fingertips, solid and cool. For a long moment, she simply sat there breathing, letting her gaze wander over the skyline as the truth of this moment settled into her bones. She remembered every humiliation that had once burned her alive, Morgan's cold serpentine smirks, Charlotte's dismissive laughter echoing across marble floors, Emma's polite, pitying eyes filled with relief that it wasn't her in Claire's place, Adam's empty, glassy stare as he chose silence over loyalty. Each memory was a blade. Each blade had carved her into the woman sitting here now, in a throne she built with her own blood and brilliance. Her phone buzzed once, vibrating against her desk like a final echo of her old life. She glanced down. An email from her attorney. Divorce settlement finalized. No contest. Full asset control retained. Clean. Efficient. Done. She closed the email with a flick of her finger and inhaled deeply. The crisp scent of green tea and fresh paper filled her lungs, cleansing, quieting, steadying her pulse. The tension that had coiled in her chest for years began to unspool, strand by strand, until it left behind only stillness, a stillness so profound it made her eyes sting with tears she hadn't expected. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of freedom. For the first time in her life, she was no longer someone's wife, someone's daughter-in-law, someone tolerated on the fringes of gilded dinner tables. She was no longer a polite ghost haunting rooms that never wanted her there. She was herself, fully, fiercely, irrevocably, and she no longer needed their acceptance to feel whole. As the sun dipped toward late afternoon, spilling gold across her desk, she stood and walked to the window. Below, the city moved in restless, unending motion. People bustled through crowded streets like currents in a vast, unknowable river. Each carried their own silent battles, hidden griefs, secret dreams. Once she had felt like a ghost among them, invisible, unworthy, desperately searching for love in all the wrong places. Not anymore. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, eyes calm, shoulders, relaxed lips, curved into a faint, unbreakable smile. She looked powerful. She looked unburdened. She looked reborn. The phone on her desk buzzed one last time. "Adam!" She didn't answer. Didn't even unlock the screen before deleting the message, erasing his presence, with the same quiet finality he had once used to erase hers. Because her journey was no longer about him, or them, or anyone who tried to define her worth by their shallow standards. It was about her. She turned away from the window, the hem of her silk dress whispering across polished marble like soft thunder. Her new executive schedule lay open on her desk, beside a page of handwritten goals for the year ahead. Each line was a promise to herself: build, create, travel, rest, love on her own terms. Claire exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of freedom settle into her bones. It was heavy and light all at once, solid and infinite, because this was her elixir, her truth. She didn't need a husband to complete her. She didn't need a family name to legitimize her. She didn't need their brittle, conditional world to validate her existence. She had chosen herself, and that was the most powerful choice she had ever made.